So for more insight, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, former IDF international spokesperson and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We're waiting to find out if the hurdles that are scuppering finality in the deal are going to be overcome. But before we even get there, Jonathan, I'm coming to you. This deal on the table, some say good, some say disastrous. Either way, it gets some of the hostages back home. Your take, your sense?
My take is that the positive side of it is that maybe we will see 33 Israeli hostages home. Maybe 33 Israeli families will be wholer again. Some of them will embrace live family members and loved ones, and some of them, unfortunately, will only get to bury murdered family members and loved ones. That, I think, concludes the positive part of this deal. The rest sides, in my mind, as far as we know now, and I think that we need to be patient because there has to be additional parts of this deal that are not yet public knowledge and that will expose themselves as the weeks and months go by. Because as the deal is now, I struggle to understand why Israel agreed to it, because it is not a good deal for Israel. It leaves Hamas in power, which is the ultimate aim of Israel's war against Hamas, is to defeat Hamas and get rid of Hamas for the sake of the future. It frees more than 1,000 Palestinian terrorists with Israeli blood on their hands, and we know how bad that is and what that will spur in the future. It allows a lot of additional humanitarian aid to enter, which is the lifeline for Hamas's rule in Gaza. And it forces Israeli troops to evacuate from the Philadelphia corridor and practically will, in the future, if that happens, opens that up for future Hamas smuggling of weapons. What we're basically doing, as the details are now, is kicking the can down the road and just a milestone, not an end to the war, not an end to the conflict. As long as Hamas is in power, then there will be war and fighting with Gaza.
Jonathan, your take on these intense airstrikes inside Gaza, and are they likely to continue?
I think that the IDF will continue to operate until the very last minute. And it is quite rich and ironic that Hamas is complaining about military activities near a ceasefire. They abducted 2 Israeli soldiers in 2014, moments after the ceasefire came into effect. So, of course, I wouldn't lend a lot of credibility. But if all right with you, I think I want to explore the bigger strategic picture of this deal. The only way that I think that this can be a positive deal for Israel and for Palestinians, for Gazans, is if the unknown parts of the deal that perhaps relate to the Islamic Republic of Iran and Saudi Arabia are a vital part of the deal, and where there are American assurances by incoming President Trump to Prime Minister Netanyahu that if we cut the deal here, then the United States will be more forthcoming and more flexible when it comes to the real big strategic picture in the Middle East, and that focuses on Iran. Knowing the Prime Minister, naive he is not, and he is extremely experienced in negotiations, I suppose that something of that kind is in the works, and we've heard former ambassador and current minister Dermer speaking a lot about Saudi in the last days, and I think that is perhaps the more positive part of it. Having said that, I still look at this deal and I see more negative than positive, and it is, in my mind, still a puzzle how we have accepted this deal, because it brings a lot of negative, and not for no good reason are there a lot of Israelis who have real issues with this deal.
There are some experts suggesting that Saudi-Israeli normalization is something that might have been discussed when Trump said, let's make this deal before the 20th, the inauguration date, which is on Monday. There might have been some kind of understanding. Also, perhaps green-lighting some kind of West Bank settlement down the line. As you say, we can't know those kind of details at this juncture. But would you suggest that Donald Trump would be more open to such moves when he does get to the Oval Office, and there is some kind of understanding between Benjamin Netanyahu and the incoming US leader?
I would suppose that there is, and I would suppose that it is perceived by the Israeli leadership as ultimately very important to be on the right side of the books with the incoming president, understanding that there's this opportunity to make that good impression and not to be seen as the ones throwing wrenches in the machinery and foiling a deal that President-elect Trump has been very vocal about wanting. And I think the Israeli leadership attaches a lot of value to being on the right side and playing a long game. Important to emphasize is that I think it's very important that Israel communicates and says what this is, because if you listen to international media on how this is now being framed around the world, including by US presidents, they're speaking about peace. They're speaking about ototo, soon to be about a two-state solution and an end to the conflict with Gazans. That's not where we are. And that is misleading. And I think it's very important that Israel speaks up and says, well, this is a ceasefire. We're just trying to get our hostages back. But until Hamas is defeated and relegated to the dustbin of history, the war is still on because we have to defend ourselves.
The timing is just beyond bizarre. Jonathan Conricus, your insights.
Well, two American presidents in live televised addresses have said that this is reality, but it still isn't. And time will tell what really is at stake here. If it really was, as I believe, Hamas making additional claims and demands, or if it was Israeli politics. But what it appears to be now is that the way I read it, and I understand very little of Israeli politics, is perhaps that Ben Gvir doesn't want to be outdone by Smotrich. Up until now, as Ariel said, most of the vocal disapproval of the deal has been from Smotrich and not from Ben Gvir, even though they share many ideological points of view, which I have to say, I agree with a lot of the substance that Smotrich says, as far as the information I have. So it is definitely a very, very interesting time where now, just listening to Mike Wagenheim's report, the amount of political capital that has been invested in it of two US presidents, and it may not become reality, quite a bizarre situation.
There's been much speculation about what the US, the new administration, and Israel might do to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions. Is the time ripe? How do you see it unfolding?
Yeah, maybe some vital signs from the Iranians after a long period of very bad news for the evil and oppressive regime in Tehran. They've had lots of setbacks, defeats by Israeli hands, and setbacks in Syria. And now, finally, from their point of view, good news, and I can understand why they're happy about it. In their place, I wouldn't be too happy about it, because I think that big picture, strategically speaking, Israel is on a direct course of confrontation with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think that the war that was sparked by one of Iran's proxies, Hamas, will eventually bring down that regime. Now, how long will it take, and what will Israel have to do to get there? And how many casualties and how much war will there be in the way? That's really the X factor. But at the end of this process, I don't think that we will see lots of tweets, definitely not boastful, from the supreme leader of that evil republic. And I think that within a few years' time, we will be in a different Middle East where Iran will not be a regional bully and it will not have access to nuclear weapons. That, I think, will happen within the next 3 or 4 years.
I want to circle back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, and it's crucial for everybody across the Middle East, and that is, when is the end of the war? Yes, we are discussing a ceasefire. Yes, it may well start at 12:15 on Sunday, although that itself is still not clear. But when, through the prism of Israelis, is the war really over?
So you're touching upon an issue that has been historically very troubling and vague in Israeli history. Most of the times, I remember myself when I was a spokesperson, we actually waited for the other side to announce ceasefires and significant events, and usually Israeli announcements to the Israeli public came afterwards, which is unfortunate. And at this situation here, a war, contrary to a military operation, is sanctioned by the cabinet, and therefore the head of the cabinet, the prime minister, is the one who has the power, the responsibility, and the authority to declare that the war is over from an Israeli perspective. And I don't see that happening until, and I don't think it should happen, until Israel achieves what it set out to achieve, and that is to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities and to take away Hamas's control over the Gaza Strip. Now, I very much agree with what Ariel has been speaking about, the lack of options here. It's one thing to say what we're not going to agree to. We're not going to have Hamas, we're not going to have the Palestinian Authority, and we're not going to have this and that. But then if we're not going to have those solutions, then what is it that we, Israel, are building, and what is our vision for the day after in Gaza? That may have been planned, but many people, most people, are not aware of any such plans, and I am not aware of any such plans to exist, and definitely not coordinated and harmonized with the Americans or with other regional players. That, I think, is super important, and really ending the war is about achieving our aims, and I don't think that Israel will end the war before it achieves its aims. And how long is that going to take? As you said before, months and perhaps more than that.
Certainly a very concerning situation. We wait to see how it all unfolds.